Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with an update for the Red-White Planeswalker deck that I think it's been a while since I've played this. This is kind of a spin-off of Scred Red. It's the trade-off here is you have Path to Exile instead of Scred, which both have their advantages. Scred, of course, is a very early removal spell that scales incredibly well and doesn't have a disadvantage of giving your opponent a basic land. Path to Exile, however, even on turn one, can basically deal with anything. And then a lot of the times, giving an opponent a basic land isn't that big of a deal. So, besides that, the list is very similar to how Scred operates. But this one's going to go back to more of an aggressive route with the Chandra's Phoenix because we're actually going to run Lightning Helix as well. So, between 4 Paths, 4 Lightning Bolts, and 4 Lightning Helixes, I think that we have the early game removal covered. This is very similar also to a deck that did very well at the Pro Tour called Mardu. I guess just Mardu Attrition is what you'd like to call it. It runs like Liliana's, Lingering Souls. Also runs the Path Exiles, Lightning Bolts, Lightning Helixes. And then it just tries to get so much card advantage through Dark Confidant and Abbot of Carol Keep. Our card advantage is going to come through cards like Volcanic Fallout and Chandra's Phoenix. So this list is nowhere near tuned. What we're getting out of this particular deck and why I'm revisiting it from Oath of the Gatewatch is Oath of Gideon, which I'm very excited to try out in the deck. Now, you might think this is a weak card, but I think that this is exactly what our Planeswalkers want. Koth that cannot protect himself. That is Koth's weakness. And so you need to be able to sometimes keep up mana through Lightning Bolts and Paths and then just cast Koth a turn late. But with Oath of Gideon, it's going to put down 2 chump blockers and also start Koth a turn ahead, which is exactly what we want with Koth. If you have Oath of Gideon and Koth the Hammer, he starts at 4 loyalty, and then you can untap a mountain, and he's already up to 5. And then if you ult Koth, there are very few, let me repeat that, very few decks in the format that can stop a Koth ult. So Affinity and Infect and Zoo and Naya Company, all those just get wrecked if Koth can ult. It's also a very fast clock with the amount of mountains we run. So this deck is going to really focus on trying to get that Koth ult out, or we have another through the Blood Moon lock and Molten Rain lock. We have another awesome card through Ajani Vengeant, which the Mardu decks were also running. One of copying most of them. So I'm thinking this deck has, again, all of its bases covered. We're going to still run like Relic of Progenitus. I think now that the metagame has shifted over to more of the aggressive Eldrazi rather than the processing Eldrazi, I think we're going to see a lot more Living End decks pop back up because I think that Living End does pretty decent against the Eldrazi aggro decks. Now, I am a little bit mixed on the discussion about banning Eldrazi Templar of Eye of Ugin. We saw some pretty degenerate things happen with Eye of Ugin especially in the top 8 of the Pro Tour. One of the rounds I specifically remember was he dropped an Eye of Ugin and then dropped 2 of the 2/2 Eldrazi's and then also an Endless one and then flipped over a Thought-Knot Seer and attacked in for 10 because the Eldrazi Mimics became 4/4s, and that was just turn 2 swinging in for that much damage. Yeah, there's some degenerate things, but there was a tweet by one of the Wizards, I can't remember which Wizards person tweeted that he's excited to see the changes, how people are going to adjust the metagame. And I like that response because instead of just going out and doing this like emergency ban, I think they should let people try and combat the format through different methods. I mean, Eldrazi just really, really messed up a lot of people's plans for this Pro Tour. A lot of the people who weren't as prepared as like the big teams that were able to kind of run the gauntlet over and over and over. I think a lot of people thought that Burn and Affinity and Infect would be very, very good for the tournament, but Eldrazi was just bigger, faster, stronger than any of those decks, and they had a very good game plan versus especially the decks that really hated out Affinity and Infect. And it just attacks on so many like angles. It can be this grindy deck that you just have to take care of these mid-range type creatures. It can also be that explosive, incredibly explosive first turn Eye of Ugin, dump your hand kind of like Affinity type deck. So I think that even though Eldrazi completely dominated the Pro Tour, I liked a chance to wait and see how the metagame adjusts and see if it is just, it was a great call. It was a great metagame call for that specific tournament. Now, this deck is going to do incredibly good versus Infect. The deck you see in front of you, the red-white walkers. It's going to do very good against Infect. It's going to do very good against Affinity. It's going to do decent against Collected Company. It's going to do decent against a lot of the combo decks. It is going to have game versus like Storm. And I do think it's going to have pretty decent game versus the Eldrazi. And if the deck does become completely dominated, I mean completely just like 90% or 80% Eldrazi, there are some cards that I think that we can put in this deck to have a lot of hate versus that type of strategy. One of them is Ghostly Prison. Ghostly Prison is really cool because the lands that the Eldrazi deck runs are not going to be able to tap for the 2 to allow them to attack. I have Ugin, reduces cost of Eldrazi spells. Temple just adds 2 mana to cast Eldrazi spells. So when you get like cards like Ghostly Prison, they are going to be able to usually afford to attack with 1 creature. Now, yes, Reality Smasher is a big deal, but I highly doubt if you have a Ghostly Prison out, they're going to be able to cast Reality Smasher and it's swinging in on the same turn. So it's like buying you 5 damage there. And we can really go crazy with Ghostly Prisons and ensnaring bridges in the sideboard if we need to combat that Reality Smasher type deck. So it also against like the Eldrazi Sky Spawner, they're not going to be able to attack with their 1/1s. The Sky Spawner version was really putting out more tokens to block the bigger Eldrazi deck, so I don't think that we have to worry about the Sky Spawner version as much as the colorless Eldrazi version with this deck. We have also game with cards like Molten Rain, and we also have a Crumble to Dust and Volcanic Fallouts and Wrath of Gods that can really wipe out the kind of flood type strategy. So instead of talking without any evidence here, let's just look at the Eldrazi decks, or the decks that did very well in the Pro Tour. So these are all the finishes at 21 and 23. We see a lot of these colorless Eldrazi's. Here's the Mardu deck. Mardu, I think, was very well positioned. It really, really punishes Affinity. And the first turn you get Inquisition of Kozilix, and then you have 3 Thoughtseizes. This deck tries to be proactive by taking care of your opponent's threats or their answers, and then it tries to get card advantage through Abbot of Carolkeep and Dark Confidant, and then it's got just nice little cards through Grim Lavamancer, Fulminator Mage, Liliana the Veil, and Ajani Vengeant. So this whole thing is, let's take care of the early game, and then we're going to out-card advantage, outvalue our opponent. And I think this deck is better than Jund now. I think that this is Jund's new replacement. Just the way that the metagame is built right now with a lot of the infects and affinities and hyper-aggressive decks like that. I think that White having access to the Lightning Helixes also gives you a lot of game versus Burn, and it's one of those cards that can really put you ahead versus Burn. And then Clothing's Command is just so good versus Affinity. So then we have a lot of Abzan Company decks. This deck, I think, had quite a bit of showing. I think it was the 3rd or 4th most played deck, was kind of these Collected Company-based decks with Court of Calling. And I think that through Relic of Progenitus in the deck that we're running is very good versus the Collected Company decks. We also have decent game with Volcanic Fallout and Wrath of God. Yes, I would prefer Anger in this particular one, but back to Mardu. Mardu, I think that Chandra's Phoenix is going to be incredibly good versus Mardu. They do a lot of damage to themselves with this deck, and the Phoenix can just keep getting in there. Liliana Veil absolutely is terrible versus Chandra's Phoenix. So is like Dark Confidant, and even if you have to use like a Lightning Bolt or Lightning Helix, Path is extremely good, but it'll ramp us up, which I don't think you want to do versus a Walker deck. So let's go down to Abzan Company. I think that we have a pretty good game against it. Affinity, we have extremely good. This is where the Volcanic Fallout's especially the hate in the sideboard with Wear Tears and Vandalblast. And then just having Path to Exiles, Lightning Bolts, Lightning Helixes do very well against Affinity in the early. Just have to wait out a Wear Tear and a Vandalblast to take out their specific Cranial Platings. And I think we're pretty good. Blue Moon, we're not very... And Blue Moon can be annoying. I think it tries to do a lot what we're trying to do. This one has Pinecrown Delar, which dies pretty easily to Volcanic Fallout. The Snapcaster Mages as well. These are things that cannot be countered by Remand or Mana Leak or Spell Snares. And the Lightning Bolt, Electrolyze, and Burst Lightning are actually quite bad versus our Walker deck. The Batter Skull is also not very good. So I think Blue Moon and us, we have a very good matchup versus Blue Moon. Angel Court is another court deck. So Volcanic Fallout can take care of early Birds of Paradise and Fauna Shamans. Wow, Fauna Shamans seeing play now in Modern, huh? And those type of decks. And then the Relic is going to be very key to making it so the Kitchen Finks can't recur over and over and over. So again, we have decent. Now, if there is a match that we're very, very favored against, is Infect with 4 Pass, 4 Lightning Helixes, and 4 Lightning Bolts. Even with the Vines of Vastwood, the Spell Pierces, and is this going to have Apostle's Blessing? Yeah, Apostle's Blessing. We're going to have a very good play versus it. Molten Rain and Blood Moon are also incredibly good versus the blue Infect deck. Zoo is a deck that I would really like Anger of Gods against. And this one is running a lot of refraction traps in the sideboard, which this one could be a bit tricky for what we're trying to do. But still, Path to Exiles, Lightning Bolts, Lightning Helixes can stop their early game, and then we'll bring in like Wrath of Gods, and I think that this deck will do very well, our sideboard will do very well against Zoo. Burn is where I think Lightning Helixes is the key card. We also have game with the Path to Exiles for early, Goblin Guides, and Swift Spears. And if we're worried about Burn, the thing is, I don't think Burn, besides a few decks, Burn I think was the most played. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. It was I know it was top 3, and it only had a very few in the top 16, or did it have any in the top 16? Maybe this guy made it to top 16 with Burn. And so you just saw that Eldrazi was bigger, faster, stronger than Burn. And so Burn, I think, has taken a backseat as the premier aggressive deck. And it's still a decent deck, and if you've ever met a Burn player, they're never going to give up on their deck no matter how bad it becomes. I've had some very angry people with me when I play Soul Sisters against Burn. And again, when Abzan was quite big, you still had Burn players. We're talking the Siege Rhino Kitchen Finks version. You still had Burn players that refused to give up the deck. So I'm sure Burn will always be there. I think it's a necessary evil in the format. It just keeps a lot of decks honest. Death Shadow aggro, Path to Exile is incredibly good versus this deck. So is the early Lightning Bolts and Lightning Helixes. You do have to worry about Become Immense combo with Mugenic Growth and Temur Battle Rage. This deck can win out of nowhere, but this is kind of funny. Actually, Death Shadow's aggro I think is pretty bad versus what we're trying to do, because a lot of times they get themselves so low, and you can just bolt them off when they try to go like combo off with Death Shadow. I have done that. I've double bolted a player when he went down to 6 life with his trying to make his Death Shadow lethal. All right, so Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam will be we will have action with Blood Moon. Not a lot, though. That's basically the only thing we can do versus this Ad Nauseam. And Blood Moon can really mess it up. They still have, like, Lotus Blooms and the Prisms. So, Skred it has been pretty decent versus Ad Nauseam. Of course, combo decks are one of the glaring holes in Skred when you're good against land-based combo decks, but not really good against other decks that aren't trying to... this Ad Nauseam is just crazy if they get a first turn Lotus Bloom. I don't think that it's a big enough part of the metagame that we care, though. Alright, so Colorless Eldrazi, we've talked about how this pairs up against Eldrazi. I think Ghostly Prison, again, does very well if they try to puke out their hand. The Volcanic Fallout's actually take care of Mimics, Endless Ones, and Mattery Shapers, at least the fast ones. And what we do have to worry about is the Reality Smashers and the Thought-Knot Seers. We'll have to wait and see if this is actually a good or a bad matchup, but Blood Moon completely decimates their lands. At that point, though, they can just start hard casting a lot of their cards, and it's still kind of difficult. Chalice on 1 does not hurt us as much as it hurts many other decks. It can take out... The only thing it actually takes out is our Relics, our Lightning Bolts, and our Path. So I'm not quite certain that Chalice is such a bomb against us. So anyway, we'll go over to Affinity. Affinity is another one of those decks that Volcanic Fallout is very good against. Wrath of God is also very good against, especially since they're not going to be able to, I think, power through Path to Exile, Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Helix before we can get a Wrath online. Ghostly Prison is also quite good against the Affinity. Elves, this is another deck that with the aforementioned cards there, the Volcanic Fallout does very well against. I think Elves is actually very good, very well positioned right now. Wrath of God takes care of Azuri, which is nice. Wrath of God states they cannot regenerate. Talked about Infect and Grixis Delver. Yeah, it's going to be a tough matchup for us. The Volcanic Fall can take care of young Pyromancer tokens, Snapcaster Mages, and Delvers, but the Angler and Tasker version of this deck is going to be rough for us to deal with. Also, this deck is known for just sheer card advantage, but we do have game versus it. Blood Moon still does very well against Grixis. They have just the 3 islands and 1 swamp that they can use in after that, and it can get quite tricky for them. Especially, does this one run Cryptic? I don't think this one does. All right. So Affinity, Death Shadow, Angel Cord, again, it's something that Relic is pretty decent. Scape Shift, we're doesn't have to concede that match. It's something that the deck is probably not going to be able to beat. And luckily for us, though, it's not the biggest portion of the metagame. And so at this point, you don't have to worry about, like, the 1%, the 2% type decks. Archangel Company, still a lot of Company, Affinity, Burn, Infect. I think we've covered our bases pretty well. There's nothing else that we'll still have Action versus Living End, too, with the main boarded Relics, which I think will work very well if Living End has a comeback. So let's just go right back to the list again. I know this is an incredibly long deck tech, over 15 minutes at the moment. So one last look. We have Needle Spires I'm trying out. I don't know if this is going to be good or not, or it's just going to be bad with our Koth. We'll have to wait and see with that. Elspeth. Elspeth is a really cool addition in the sideboard. Elspeth Tirel, this is the one out of Scars of Mirrodin. I like this because with Oath of Gideon, she starts on her ult. And I think that's going to be very, 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 very relevant. So this is our version of like the Oblivion Stone. Destroy all other permanents except for lands and tokens. So you cast Elspeth, and if they are a huge creature or especially like Affinity, this just completely wrecks Affinity. All their Springleaf Drums, all their Mox Opals, all of their other cards. I mean, they could still Arcbound Ravager onto an Moth Nexus, but you know, that's life there if that happens at that point. We have Molten Rains for Moth Nexuses that I usually do bring in versus Infect or against Affinity. And then Wear Tear is also extremely good in that case, an instant speed. Destroy target artifact. You can also destroy an enchantment if they bring in that pesky enchantment from Origins that allows them to tap for damage. Anyway, that is basically the gist of the deck. We're going to queue it up in a daily and see how well it does and see if I'm just very wrong about this deck or if we have something going here. So I might need more Wrath of Gods or Ghostly Prisons. We'll have to wait and see. We'll take some notes and then decide on what list. But a lot of people have been asking for a red-white Planeswalker deck. This is the best I can come up with. I'm still definitely interested in any suggestions in the comment section below. And as always, I am really looking forward to those comments and the participation to make this deck a much more viable deck. It takes community, I think, to build these type of decks. We do not have the advantage like some of the pro teams just to have such a gauntlet of players playing our deck. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys would try this deck out and let me know how it works for you and any suggestions. Anyway, this has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.